Hi and welcome to JAX London. I've got Ruiz here with me. Hi.
Hi.
You have a session later today, right?
Yes.
So what's it all about?
It's testing. I will present some libraries that I think very useful for Java developers. And not only that, because I try to showcase the potential of the tool. And I will talk that they are completely agnostic, language agnostic. So of course, Java developers can profit from them, but the idea is to give them a broader overview about them.
And speaking of testing and everything, is testing code as important as producing code?
I think it's even more important because, software developer, it's something really interesting. Nowadays, every single business is a software developer or software business. I mean, any business has to have some support from software, and most of them will depend on software. So our job, it's more important day on day. And providing what the client requests, how it needs, and without any errors is super important. The only way to do it is, we can have different phases, we can test at different parts of the project or the software lifecycle. But introducing tests since the early beginning will help the quality and will reduce the effort we have to put day on developing the project. So yes, I think people always say like 80% of your time should be into writing the production code and 20% in tests. Or they always think that we will do it at the end. We will test at the end and push it away. My advice to those people is really, if you change and you start thinking, doing testing since the beginning, even it's going to make your life easier, because that 80% of the time or you're going to invest is going to be more focused. You're going to be closer to what the client is expecting you can deliver, and it will make, as I said, our efforts more focused, increase the quality of the work that we are delivering, and reducing problems that are easy to catch.
Yeah, that's great. We should keep that in mind, definitely. So half an hour earlier, we had a keynote, and the keynoter asked participants to raise their hands if they are developers or if they are testers. And I would say like 99% raised their hands when she asked about developers, and only 1% were testers, apparently. Why? And it felt like she said something like, don't be afraid if you're a tester, raise your hand. So why the stigma? That's a strong word, but are they like less important than developers?
No, I think the problem is that the challenge is in figuring how to do things. And testing, when you are just a tester, you are not creating something new. You are not solving a puzzle. You are only verifying that things are being done in the proper way. But for me, that also has an interesting side. I had several discussions with other people asking them, for you, the tests is the documentation of what is there, or it's a guide of what it's supposed to do the software. So there were interesting conversations about that topic. And if you ask people, developers, tests should describe what is happening, even though maybe the execution or the behavior is not the expected one, but it's documented on the tests. Or if the test should document what it should happen, what the client is expecting it to happen. And they are like, I kid you not, maybe half of the people will say no, it should document what it's happening right now, even if the behavior is not the expected one. And you're like, okay. And the other half will tell you, no, tests not only have to provide like this is the state of the code, they also have to reflect what the client expects. But it's not really like a clear-cut answer. I was amazed by that.
But why is that? I mean, there are so many misunderstandings, let's say.
Exactly that. I'm baffled by it. I think we all during our careers, when we are taking classes about architecture or doing projects during college or whatever in our formation days, they always push us the idea of do testing, maybe not so strong, but we never sit down and think about this kind of things, like the philosophical idea of why we should do testing and what is the purpose of testing. And that's when I see the opportunity to do something different, where it's not as dual work as just testing what other people create, what other people figure out is the right solution. So for me, yes, of course, I try to document what the code is doing, because every single time we do refactor, we want to provide people the certainty that the refactor will not break the existing behavior. But on the other hand, I also like to provide tests that reflect what the software should do in different cases. That is also a challenge in itself.
Yeah. And how can we educate people to avoid falling into this trap?
Yes, well, in my case, I attend to a lot of conferences and on conferences. So as you said, sometimes testing is not the most sexy topic in a conference, but I think it's one of the foundations of our industry. So, for example, in on conferences, you will always see me proposing soft skills topics, because we are also lacking, diversity topics, testing topics, and more into really what I call the core of our industry, which is like architecture, design, and things like that. Not the buzzwords, not what it's trendy, but back to basics. So for me, it's like that. Conferences, maybe speaking to people that are professors or teachers and remind them that outside we have a problem with these topics and we need their help.
Perhaps even company culture. I mean, that should somehow embed the idea that testing is important, and there's not one person like it's with DevOps, because developers tend to be considered more important than ops people, and it's the same story over and over again. We need to reinforce the fact that testing is very important, and they need to give it a clear idea. And you also mentioned that you are going to talk about libraries, right?
Yes.
So tell me more about that.
Well, actually, I have several passions. So another of my passions is open source. So whenever I'm on a conference, I also try to showcase open source libraries, because as you know, they need support in terms of we need to recruit a lot of people that are willing to use them, and not only that, then write or help them with patches, bug reports or whatever. In terms of as developers, we can help open source. So I'm going to talk about libraries for testing. My main focus in this session is going to be REST APIs. How do we I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of the affairs. We depend a lot of REST APIs, endpoint services. I mean, it's really difficult nowadays to find a software where you don't consume a REST API endpoint. And even now with the microservices idea, I don't know, well, I don't want to get into that discussion about the communication between microservices, but you have also two sides. One said that it should be asynchronous, the other ones are saying, well, REST is over there, we should use it, even though it's synchronous. But regardless of this, you still, even if you're writing a microservices, you're still going to talk to those services. And what happens if you depend on them and something happens with that specific module, service, or whatever? So during developing and during testing, you need to fake out both sides, the server, the client, and exactly that. You only have, if you consider this 20%, you have to be very efficient, effective, and quick. So that's why I like to provide really powerful libraries, so people spend the least amount of time with the boilerplate part of the code.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I tell them you're going to spend that 20% of your time on testing in just creating the boilerplate of the tests, they're going to say, no, this is a project in itself, lx-chel, we don't have that time budget. So, okay, I'm going to present how to fake REST clients, how to fake server clients, and the other side is how to parameterize tests to make them more readable, for example, and easier. I mean, if you have parameterized tests, you can test with less effort more things. So you see, this is like my suggestion.
Yeah.
Like, it's important. Sometimes we're not doing the best of jobs in testing, and we should be using more tools to increase our effectiveness when we are using that 20% of our budget.
True, true. Speaking of tools, since this is a Java conference, I have to ask, what are your favorite Java testing tools? If you have a favorite.
Yeah,
obviously.
yes. I mean, it's an interesting question because I believe that we should use the tool that fits the task. So I can tell you what I use day to day. For example, there's so many because it depends on what I'm testing.
Of course.
But, well, let's start. I use test containers when I sometimes have to do integration tests, and I depend on, or I'm working a product and we have to, for example, do tests against different type of databases. So for those kind of integration tests, I use test containers. For doing REST endpoints, I use WireMock or REST Assure. For doing also very interesting communication, JMeter. What else do I use? I don't do a lot of benchmark or micro benchmark, but I have used in the past JMH. I have a very set opinion about benchmarking.
Which is?
It's difficult.
Oh.
So it's really difficult, and you can get very biased results. So you have to really consider what are you testing, how are you testing, how is your data, because obviously it all depends on how you're setting up your data and how you're handling your data during the test to provide fair and unbiased results. So it's difficult. So I'm very skeptical when I see a benchmark. I always want to see how they come to those numbers. But if you are inclined to do it, I totally recommend using JMH. Yeah. What else do I use? I think, yeah. Oh well, JUnit obviously. you sometimes it's like the default there, so you don't even think about it. And
It's
Spock.
too obvious.
Yes, it's too obvious. Like, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mockito. Yeah. JUnit, Mockito, and Spock.
So many tools. Yeah, true. I mean, one needs a lot of a whole army of tools in order to.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
And you have a preference for open source, right, as you mentioned.
Yes.
So we should support open source and give back, of course.
Yes, yes. I mean, all projects, every single developer, we use an open source project. There is no way to escape from that.
Yeah.
Even as a consumer that is not in IT, you still depend on open source. So if we have the luck and the opportunity to provide or review file bug fixes or provide a patch, then I think we can do it.
Of course.
And we should do it.
And open source is about the community, so we have
Yes.
to use and then give back, and that's how things go.
For me, it has been an experience to explore new technologies, to keep always in sync with the current things out there, with the current tools. Because sometimes if you're working in a company that it's like banks, they don't tend to change things so often, and it's totally understandable.
Yeah.
So sometimes you stay like froze in time. And if you don't have these outlets where you have your pet projects, well, the first idea is to have your pet project, and you decide what build tools you're going to use, what continuous integration deployment tools you want to use, what testing frameworks, etc., etc. And it's always nice, but if it's only you, the consumer, and you, the producer, it gets boring fast. But as soon as you are contributing back to an open source project and you start seeing like, hey, this is not working, can you fix it? Or this is so very narrow, I need a more generic solution. Then you start communicating with people that you wouldn't in the past. You start seeing that perhaps your designs need a little bit more generalization. So you start improving. So not only you are using more current tools that keep your skills up to date, so in any time you want to change jobs, it's going to be easier. You expand your network of people that you know, because who knows, with these weak connections that you are forming with developers around the world, it's easier to, like, in the next time you are looking for a job, saying, I'm looking for XYZ, and people that already have a connection with you can tell you, hey, I saw this job opening, maybe you should apply for that one. And then suddenly you have more options.
Exactly. That's a great takeaway right there. Thank you very much for the interview, and good luck with your session later today.
Thank you very much.